we're constantly cleaning the voter rolls. We're removing people because they've died. We're moving people around the state. We check against Department of Corrections. We check against ITD. We're constantly doing updates. We provide a report to the legislature every year of the voter cleanup that we've done to the rolls. Just to let them know, here's what we're up to.
Secretary McGrane, thank you for coming.
Happy to be here.
So,
thank you, Matt.
I've been looking forward to talking to you for some time. We finally were able to line it up. I'm super pumped. Not just because you have revolutionized the way that people can register for businesses online, which I was able to do in like 10 minutes, which was awesome. Get an ABN like almost instantaneously. That's awesome. But you guys are also revolutionizing the voting process, making it more and more secure. You're doing all kinds of cool things. And I will admit, I had no idea what the Secretary of State did before
Nor did anybody else.
Right. Before I started looking into the things you guys are doing. And I did speak with Chad Hoke. He was wonderful, came in. I'm really taken by it because I feel like you're actually an example of government functioning properly, which is almost impossible to say, but I feel it. So thank you for what you're doing, first off.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's get going on. Like, do you want to start with, let's just start with voting. Okay. Because there are several examples of the voting security and integrity in Idaho that I'm very taken by, specifically a local example in Ada County. Explain what happens in Ada County with votes and people being able to verify them.
Well, let me just start because, where we are in time, we have a primary election a week away. So it's voting time is happening. And I think, especially as we were talking, before the show, one of the big things is the primary election is coming up here. The primary election in Idaho is the election. Right. Overwhelmingly, it's where people are going to get elected from. And that's just because, one, Idaho is an extremely red state. You've seen me present the information before. 58% of Idahoans are registered Republicans right now. So we will see a Republican-dominated legislature. There's no doubt about that. But what also gets lost is here in your studio, we're in District 19. District 19 happens to be the most Democratic district in the state. It will also be determined in the primary. There are very few districts where it's actually competitive, whether it's Democratic or Republican. Most districts will be determined in May. And one of the biggest challenges I see is voters naturally associate voting with November. We all know there's a presidential election coming up. You're living under a rock if you don't know that that's happening. Everyone's focused on November. And really, because the nominees are already decided across the country, primaries have seen a drop in turnout because the president drives things. Right. But when you talk to the average Idahoan, the issues that are facing them and the things they're concerned about aren't things that'll be impacted by the president. Right now, if you've driven downtown Boise, I work down at the Capitol building. I cannot figure out yet how to get to my parking spot the best way because of all the road construction that ACHD and ITD have going on. It's torn up everywhere. And I joke about it. I love to share a story when we talk about elections of just how do we get people, it goes to your view just here with the show, like communicating with people, getting people engaged, and specifically getting them engaged in local issues. So whether it's the legislature, right, and all the things that are being debated down at the Capitol building, whether it's the city council. I know here you focus a lot on the city of Eagle. The city of Eagle is a fascinating city. We can talk more about that in terms of Eagle does not reelect mayors ever.
Right. It's just constant turnover.
Constant turnover. I think it was 2002 was the last Eagle mayor reelected. There's plenty to talk about there. But my favorite is ACHD. Ada County Highway District, they maintain all the roads here locally. I don't know anybody who has not at some point griped about ACHD, whether that's because they were chip sealing the road and their windshield got cracked, there were potholes, there's road construction, the snow didn't get removed on time, and yet...
Or it's just traffic.
Really, right. That's a very fair point. Don't go to Eagle Road.
Right. Eagle Road in Chinden, I take my kids down to the Y for swimming and stuff or whatever. Oh my God, you're losing 15 minutes. You're crawling past Crave and everything else, the Lux. Right. Oh my God, good night. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
So what's fascinating about it is obviously 2020 election has brought so much attention. You mentioned you didn't know what a Secretary of State did. No one did until 2020 hit. Right now, all of a sudden, the role is more high profile. Well, here locally, I was the Ada County clerk at the time. We had a very close election into 2020, but it was a local election. So everyone's focused on the presidential election, but here we had a contentious recount. One of the Ada County Highway District seats was determined by 2 votes. 2 votes. Wow. Out of 40,000 votes cast. Process that. It's less than 0.005% difference. And there's a lot I could share on this, but like when we're talking about voting and your vote counts, when it's that close, I can tell you, having run for office, any candidate can find 2 people that did not show up in that particular election. And so, I'm happy to say we went through a very contentious recount, went through everything. The results stood as should be expected. Our elections work, our systems work. But what's more fascinating, the reason I bring that up and compare it with the griping about ACHD is it wasn't just a matter for any of those candidates to get 2 more people to show up and vote. Of the people, the 40,000 people who showed up that day with a ballot in hand and a pen in a voting booth, of the 40,000, 10,000 skipped that race. 10,000 people were there to vote and they just didn't know anybody. They didn't know anything about the Ada County Highway District. So despite sitting in traffic at Chinden, by Eagle, they just didn't vote in it. And so one of the biggest challenges we see in our office overseeing elections is how do we get more information out to voters? One of the big successes we've had this year is the new launch of the voteidaho.gov website. So we have an entire new website trying to provide more resources, more tools. I think that's how you and I have really gotten connected is more information to voters to say, here's what's happening in our state. Right. Here's how you register to vote. Here's how you request an absentee ballot. Here's where you find your polling location. Right. All the things. Like we're trying to bring everything together so that we can just get people more engaged in our community because I love this state. I know just talking to you, you love this state. Oh, yeah. Like we want to see this place thrive. I think the people who listen to your show, like they want to see this place thrive. And so really it takes all of us participating in the process.
Right. I really appreciate that. And I do agree that it's exceedingly difficult to find out information. Like over this last session, I was going through several different bills. I care deeply about libraries, for instance, and the library is like obviously a really contentious thing. And it's bonkers how worked up people get over it. And okay, great. Yeah. Like we should be passionate about it 100%. But understanding the nuances, there were like 5 or 6 different revisions on different library bills, like local control, state control, fines, no fines, public libraries and schools or just schools. There were all kinds of different things. And tracking all of that was really tough. And I did a couple videos on the different library bills to help people understand. And people started sharing them. They're like, oh, this is only like 5 minutes and gives me the perfect breakdown. And
I couldn't find this anywhere else. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And again, it's helping people understand enough that they have then feel comfortable at having an opinion. That's really key. The difficulty is making sure that as you're doing that, from my standpoint anyway, is that there's nothing else inserted into it. And so even when I would do, like a library video or something like that, I'd have to go through really carefully and be like, it kind of looks like you leaned a little bit like this way, or like you got to take that thing out. Or I say like, great. All the time. It's like, you can't say, oh, great. You can't anyway. So you have to give information to people in a compelling manner that really doesn't try to hammer them one way or another, which is, again, a difficult thing. But getting the information out, communicating with people. We've never had a better time to communicate. Sure. The problem is this. Right. The problem is, but everybody wants to communicate. So like we have to make content that goes onto Instagram. Like I try to not watch Instagram. I unfollow. Over the last 6 months, I've unfollowed everybody that I liked watching because I knew I liked watching them. And I was like, you can't get, and it's not like, I'm talking like street videos of food from India. Sure. Like I don't know why, but my eyes locked on to some dude sticking his arm in a bucket of green stuff and like stirring it around and taking a ball and handing it to, like, I have no idea why. Like I can't look away. There's another guy who did dubs over things. So he would give like commentaries like, what the hell are you? And he was hilarious. Like the guy in the time that I was following him for like 3 weeks, when I realized like, oh, you got to turn this off. He went from like 800,000 to like 1.5 million followers. So like he was really hitting and he was so good. He put out like 10 videos a day. And it was an interesting style of content because he didn't make the original content. I actually call this a style of content called IP theft. So essentially what you do is IP theft.
I take your show and I do the commentary for your show.
Right. So I don't have the burden of coming up with something interesting. My burden is taking this and then saying something interesting, but I'm already halfway there because I have a video that's been upregulated by the algorithm. So I don't have any creative necessity, right? I just have to say something like kind of funny. And you see this with there's a gal called Megan Stallion, and she's this just normal looking girl who always drinks Miller Lite. And her whole thing is that she acts out comic bits from like Kevin Hart or something like that.
Oh,
she doesn't
like they had to come up with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's her literally playing the audio of the Kevin Hart and then just filming herself, like going back and forth, acting out this stuff. So she didn't have any of the creative burden. She's just acting out this thing that somebody else spent millions of dollars to make cool. So it's difficult. It's difficult to give people the information and beat, like Kevin Hart, mock-ups and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. But here we are. We're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying. So talk to me about the election system.
Yeah. In terms of, again, we have an election coming up. Hopefully we can get people registered to vote. Idaho's made some great changes. One of the things I think that stands out about Idaho is really we have made it very accessible. You can go on election day and vote. Even if you just moved here, let's say you moved here a month ago, you need to register, you can do that at the polls. You can show up to early voting. We've got early voting happening right now for the election. We've got absentee voting. That has wrapped up for this election because we're so close to the finish. But, one of the biggest things is at the ground level, we have county clerks ranging from here in Ada County. So Ada County has a little over 300,000 registered voters, all the way down to Clark County has less than 350 registered voters. Wow. So you can just see the breadth of our state. But you have dedicated people all throughout the state helping make sure this happens. I think one of the great things about Idaho is it really still feels like a community event. When we think about going back to the founding fathers and the principles, the idea of the republic, it really is us all coming together, picking our leaders so that they can help make decisions so that we can all thrive. You and I at the very beginning, we're talking about the free market and the miracle that it is. And what it is it's that collectively we can do so much more than we ever possibly can imagine doing individually. Right. And so this is where that comes to a head in terms of self-governance, is us coming together and doing things. And some of the ways that that's reflected, that'll be here in Dry Creek, is you have poll workers, you have local neighbors who are going to take time and spend their entire Tuesday helping make it possible for people to vote. When we talk about elections, a lot of the attention goes on people like me or someone like the county clerk. But really, it's the boots on the ground, the people who are giving up their time and their day to help their community members that really run our election system. So with the election coming up, we'll use just shy of 5,000 poll workers across the state of Idaho. That's 5,000 Idahoans who are making time to allow everybody else to have the opportunity to vote. And when we start thinking about safeguards and how our elections function and everything else, you got to picture that neighbor, because that's really the person who's doing most of the work in terms of whether it's issuing ballots, but also whether it's making sure to enforce the laws and making sure to work through everything so that it goes well. And I've just been very fortunate throughout my career to be involved in this and to work with a lot of these people from when I started training poll workers almost 20 years ago to where I'm sitting now, traveling across the state, meeting with different people, and really just hopefully building up more interest in our election system.
I appreciate that. One thing, and again, I moved from California.
Yep.
Like no secret there. But one thing that I know a lot of people are anxious about is when you say, hey, look, we're all coming together. I guarantee you, like, you just got the biggest eye roll that Idaho has ever. It's like, oh my God. Because people are so frustrated with what appears to be voting manipulation. I think in other states, and this is another area that I firmly believe Idaho is paying the price for crimes it did not commit. Because again, like education, like law enforcement, like a bunch of other things, other states mismanage these things and have poor policies. And then people move to Idaho upset about these things. And Idaho didn't have anything to do with it. Like, you hate the public school system because, like, California's crazy.
Wherever you came from.
Right. Not because West Ada's crazy. Like, I think West Ada does a great job as far as public education. Like, give me a break. Anyway, my point is,
I actually think, I think most people actually have confidence in the process and the system. When I interact with,
I think you're crazy.
That's fine. I genuinely do. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is this environment, the political environment has become so polarized, so
That's fair.
so extreme that most people are just turned off by it. Like, I'm sure you have impassioned. I mean, you cover a lot of political figures and stuff. You have people who are super engaged. And in the world that I operate, I run into some of the most engaged people across the state. But I also think, like, when I talk to my friends, like if I go, like tonight, I'll be at the flag football game with my son, right? And I go around and talk to all of my neighbors and friends at flag football. They don't have strong.
They're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you. They're like, they're not going to tell you your baby's ugly. They're not going to tell you that.
No, they do tell me, because this is one of our challenges, is getting people to show up. Here we have a major election coming up, right, and I hope we get 35% turnout, right? That means there's a whole bunch of people who are just okay with whatever.
Let me ask you this, because I want to talk to you about voter fraud, which I know you covered in your presentation, but
sure.
Before, I think you're making a really astute point, which is that people get so exhausted from like national crisis theater that when you break it down to like, okay, I understand, like this is going on here and then Texas and then this, but like we really should care about our roads. And they're like, I can't keep anything else in my head.
There's so much noise.
I can't conceptualize another problem and a potential solution in somebody who represents the best option for that solution. Like, I can't do it anymore. So they just get to the point of exhaustion where they're like, I'm too fatigued to even show up to the poll and give a crap.
I think that's true. Yeah. And we haven't necessarily made it easy enough, right? Like that's one of the other parts we talked about earlier is, if I have to go, not only you're asking me to take time out of my busy day, number one reason people don't vote is they're busy.
Right.
They've got work. They've got, kids getting out of school. They've got just life that the rest of us can relate to. But then they're like, you want me to go like research? I got to go Google all these people. I don't even know who these people are, let alone to go Google them. And I think that's one of the efforts that we're really trying to lead on, is pushing, saying like, let's make this stuff attainable. Like, and this is really what you do with your show, is you try to bring people in. You were talking about having all the Ada County Commission candidates in, because you're like, let's hear from these people. Let's actually, rather than just what we saw on a sign on the side of the road, or what my friend's neighbor's sister told me about this person, like, let's hear from these people. And you said with some of the candidates that you met, you're like, I didn't think I was going to like this guy. But when I sat down, like, actually it was pretty engaging, and there was more information. Like, okay, so how do we start hearing from these people? One of the most common things, and you've heard me say this, that we get requests for is a voter guide. Where do we get voting information that isn't biased? So when I say voter guide, I'm not necessarily talking about the junk mail that you get in the mail from
whatever pack.
Save the whatever pack, or
Save the whatever.
Like all
Save the conservatives.
Yes, all these things, and that's my world. We regulate all this stuff, so we're in the thick of all that right now. But where can you get and just hear from the people? One of the things I've been advocating for in the legislature.
Wait. Go back. How do you provide that?
We don't.
I was thinking about that.
We need
morning.
this. Right? Other states provide this information. As I like to say, all of our feeder states provide this information. So whether it's a California, Washington, Oregon, Utah, it's not just Democratic states, it's conservative states as well. But just something where you can say, so what we've pitched is saying, let's get 200 words from every candidate, put it together, let them share a link to their whatever website, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, I don't care. Like, let's just get information so that voters can have it. We hear from people all the time who will request an absentee ballot, not because they're traveling or have anything going on, or really because they even want to vote absentee. They just want to have the opportunity to have the list of names in front of them and to go
sit down with a cup of coffee.
Yes, they're like, let me look up the Ranch podcast and see if we've got any interviews with these people. Yeah, right. And so one of my big focuses is push that. Now, unfortunately, the past 2 legislative sessions, I haven't been able to get it out of the House. So JFAC has been ready and willing to fund it because they see the need. And what we're seeing too is more and more outside political groups. We have groups from DC trying to flood the airways with information, more misinformation. It just depends on what you consider it. People who don't care about Idaho, don't care about our elections, flooding information here. And it's like, no, let's hear from people. And you and I know this well enough. Like, I don't care whether it's a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, Constitutionalist, doesn't matter. Like, let's just hear from the person.
Let's just hear from them.
Yeah.
Like, I want to hear. So to your point, I got a message. There's a gal named Andrea that is way into homeschooling, and she's a big homeschool advocate, always talks about different policies. She's great. She's like the homeschool watchdog, and she's got this platform, and I had an interview with her recently. She was great. She hit me up yesterday on Instagram saying like, hey, should I be worried about this? And she sent me a video, and she lives in Chuck Winder's area. Okay. And it was a video of her. She had 2 tables set up, and she's like, okay, this is all of the mailers
Like
that I've
the
got
junk
for
mail.
Chuck. And then these are all of the videos that I got against them. And she's like, I don't know where these people are. Like, this stuff is coming from out of state. Like, who are these
Right.
people going against him? And then she was asking, hey, do the people that support, or do the people that talk against Chuck have to register or disclose that they're supporting his opponent? And I was like, no, they don't. No, they have to tell you where it's coming from.
And
or
possibly they may not even know who his opponent is.
right. They're just going against him. And she's
Yeah.
like, who are they? I'm like, we will never know. Like, these are random out of state PACs that are just flooding, Winder's area with all of this information. And she, as his constituent, was like, can I get a hold of him? I'm like, I mean, I guess you can. Like, I don't have his number, but like,
Sure.
try to get him. Yeah. Because again, it's outside manipulation of right here, which
Right.
just boils my blood. It's like, stop. Like,
Yes.
ugh.
It's so tough. I think with all the growth, and when I say that, I don't mean the people coming to Idaho. It's just with all the growth, there's been more attention, and Idaho has kind of popped up on the map. It's in politics, it's considered what's referred to as a low dollar state. So compared to other bigger states, it costs a lot more to run campaigns. Here it's not. So for DC, this is like throwaway money to them to influence the outcome of an election, to fit into some national political issue or narrative. And what's challenging is we need to take care of ourselves.
Right.
Like, we need to govern ourselves, And so one of my efforts really is like, how do I get information that where someone can say like, oh, okay, this message is from candidate A, this message is from candidate B, and then I can size them up. And we know when we're looking at that, sometimes it'll hit, sometimes it won't. I think you and I know if someone writes in all caps with lots of exclamation points, like, that's a red flag. Right. And like, let's just see who these people are. So I'm going to continue pushing for it.
That's a great idea. Like, I should do that with all the candidates I did interviews with, the 6 Ada County commissioners, and just say, hey, look, give me 200 words. I'll do a video comparing because I was trying to think like, how do I reduce down an hour conversation with people in an unbiased manner? I'm like, I wouldn't know what to cut. Like, I could cut all of the points where I'm talking out, but you'll end up with like a 45-minute conversation.
Right.
It needs to be more accessible.
It's also worth noting, so as a former county official myself, right? No one knew that the Secretary of State was elected, let alone no one knows that they elect their county clerk. But when you talk about those Ada County Commission races, Ada County Commission oversees one of the largest budgets in the state of Idaho, just because of our population, size, the issues. I know in the past you've talked to Sheriff Clifford, the jail bond, all these issues. And they're very real issues in terms of public safety, in terms of just taxation in general here in the county, property taxes. We all feel that. It's an important office, but it's great that you have interviewed these people, because it's a really, really difficult office to run for, because most of the money and most of the attention go to the Chuck Winders. They go to the legislative seats or to the statewide officials or to everything else. But Ada County has 10 legislative districts. That means all those candidates you met with, they're trying with their little limited budgets to hit 10 times the number of voters that any of these legislators are. They get like a third of the budget and 10 times the people to hit. And so, it's an important area to get information out there. So I love what you're doing. I love anybody who's getting engaged in the process, trying to get information, to meet people where they are. I always kind of joke, when it comes to primary elections, the hardest thing is to get someone, whether it's to get off their tractor, the heavy equipment, get off their horse, take time after work to stop at their polls to get out and vote. Headed into the November election, we do plan, I did this at Ada County, so it's available at adacountyelections.com currently, but we will be adding to the Vote Idaho website the ability to go look at your ballot in advance. Like you can actually go see an exact image of the ballot you'll be voting so that you know, like just because you see a sign for one candidate, like, do I live in that area? You know, talk about where we drive out here.
Right.
We're going to see signs largely for like the Eagle area, even though we're actually connected to downtown Boise.
Right.
And like, so how do you get the information you need to make informed choices? That's one of the biggest things for me. And then get people involved. I think this state, I have a lot of confidence in the voters of this state. I have a confidence in them being able to make smart choices, and that when we all come together and we pick, we're not always going to be happy. I'm not always going to get the choices I want. You're not always going to get the choices you want. But collectively, we come up with a pretty good slate of people. That's what's attracting so many people to the state of Idaho is they're like, this place is amazing. Right. It's not just the natural beauty, but it's also like you walk around downtown and you feel like, this is awesome. Like,
right.
There's good food. I feel safe. I can let my kids run around.
Right.
You know, we live in an area where our kids can roam freely and we don't worry about it.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
It's really amazing. And a very small point about something you were saying, that when Idaho is like any other place, it can be manipulated. Right. And that's something that's so problematic. And you have political actors, you have mailers, you have all of these things, because ultimately the problem with allowing people to function in an autonomous, well-informed manner is that they'll probably come up with good ways to live and they'll get along with each other. Right? That's bad for somebody who doesn't want that. There's like, if you're against America, you don't want America to function properly. And this is not a conspiracy theorist. Like, this is just common sense. Like, if you want to disrupt things or if you want to combat somebody, you don't want them functioning properly together. And I think it's so evident. It's very evident in larger West Coast states and in different areas, but even down here, like we were talking about some of the protests downtown. It's like, it's clear that the law enforcement has identified these people from out of state. Yep. These are 2 or 3 or 4 different organizations that are understood to be going around doing these things and really trying to bother people and disrupt our everyday functionings. And that makes me so insane. I get so mad when I hear about things like that. It's like, just stop.
I think you and everybody else. I think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, to your point about trying to understand who you're voting for, just try to do a little research. Like, it's just a tiny bit. And I know that's
thankfully there's people like you helping people get there, right? Getting
too
to meet
long.
Some of these
My
people.
interviews are too long. I got to work something out. I think we're going to work together on a voter guide of some sort, because like, I think that's a great idea. Helping people identify helping the candidates say, hey, look, this is the message that I want to get out, or this is
what's important to me. Right. Like,
and
these are the things I care about.
Right. And helping spread that around, because if you can distill it down to something valuable and actionable for individuals to actually consider, then we can get great turnout. Here's the thing. There are a lot of people, not all people, but there are a lot of people who watch national media, who think about ballot box stuffing, who like see, small videos of people with like bags of ballots in the back of a trunk that they're like stuffing in whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they take that as like, oh, this is part of the reason why Idaho elections don't count. It's like, whoa.
Yep.
Hang on now. Hang on now.
Time out.
First off, I don't know where that video is from. I don't know what's going on. Like, it doesn't take a lot to go photocopy a lot of things and then stuff them into a ballot to make an awesome social media video.
Sure.
But not realize that it is virtually impossible for those to get counted in the actual count. Like the number, here's something that blew my mind, that you guys actually count the number of ballots. You know the exact number of pieces of papers that get printed on as they go out, as they come back. That it is possible to commit voter fraud in Idaho, but you have to overcome things. It's
also possible for us to catch and pursue people who commit voter fraud in the state of Idaho.
Right. And it can come down to literally, as you registered to vote, you had a signature, and then you signed your ballot as you turned it in, and those signatures don't match. And we check them.
Yes.
And
we actually, in fact, check every single one of them. So when somebody mails an absentee ballots are one of the things, plenty to talk about national news, lots of concerns,
everybody's
questions.
worried about that.
They're also just for us when we are processing votes. One of the more interesting ones, I always joke, when we send absentee ballots out, we send them out into the wild. Some of them come back looking like they came from the wild. I love to share, like, I've gotten multiple elections, gummy bears from voters. We'll find cash in whiteout. We get manifestos across the top of the ballots. My most irritating one ever was a voter, instead of following the directions and filling in the box to mark his votes, he took an X-Acto knife and cut out the votes. And it was very easy to tell what they intended. So we, went with voter intent, despite it was very irritating for those of us running the election. But we process everything. So in Ada County in 2020, we had 129,000 people vote by absentee. We had staff check 129,000 signatures. We compare them against the signature on the driver's license or the signature on the voter registration card. We provide training. Our office provides training for all of the clerks and staff statewide in terms of signature verification. And I think, to distill it down, I mentioned earlier that really close, that 2-vote race for ACHT. It's worth noting in that race, we had 3 absentee ballots that we had rejected. So 2-vote race, 3 absentee ballots. You can appreciate every candidate and every lawyer involved in that had a strong interest in those ballots.
3. What?
Yes, talk about focus. And so, one of them was easy. None of those 3 ballots ever got counted. They remained in their original envelopes because we rejected them in the signature verification process, just like you talked about. One of them was easy because I don't know why they requested the ballot, because they drew a very juvenile picture on it. It was inappropriate. Poor ladies who had to look at it. So easy enough, not that person. The other one was an easy one for us to identify, even though we still couldn't count it. And this can happen, while infrequent, it happens. It happens to some degree. It was a roommate, so one person signed the other person's ballot. Doesn't matter. Even if you sign your spouse's ballot, we still can't check it. We'll try to get it. We'll contact you in an attempt to get it corrected. But if it's not the voter, it doesn't count. It's as simple as that. The third one's the more interesting one I love to share with people, because when doing the signature verification, the signature on the absentee was a beautiful flowing signatures, full first name, full middle name, full last name. Now, I don't know anybody who actually signs their name that way. But you wanted to, because it just looked great. I always say it had the touch of a slightly older woman, just good penmanship. Now, the driver's license image was a hot, squiggly mess. The voter was an 18-year-old male. Which of those two signatures sounds like it was the voter's signature, right? It was the squiggly mess. Sure enough, though, through our work, because we pursue all of this stuff, we were able to do some investigation, look into the matter, and sure enough, mom had voted her son's ballot. Son was off to college. Mom thought she would vote for him. And it doesn't matter that you're related. It's still a crime. So the Ada County Sheriff's Office met with both mom and with son and pursued this as one of our handful of voter fraud cases. We do every election. I think as an election official, one of the hardest narratives these days is there's either rampant voter fraud or there's no voter fraud. And the truth is, there does exist some voter fraud, but we have so many safeguards in place, as you outlined, to check against that. And one of the things I think is important to share, it's not just here in Idaho we have safeguards in place. Across the country we have safeguards in place. And I think one of the greatest benefits following 2020 is that we are making improvements to our processes and systems to make our elections better, and finding practices that, across the 50 states, we're yeah, we should all be doing that. So a perfect example is almost everywhere, not everywhere yet, but almost everywhere, there is a physical paper ballot for every voter. So when you're doing a recount or you're doing some sort of contest, you're actually going to the official paper record that the voter deposited, as opposed to a touchscreen or some other digital technology. Becoming pretty commonplace. And so we passed legislation this last session is not having the equipment that counts the votes, never having that connected to the internet. The simplest way to stop hackers is to just cut the cord. If you want to hack any of the elections here in Idaho, you need to physically go to the elections office and try to tamper the equipment there. And even in those spaces, it's locked down there. And that's part of their system. And that's happening across the country. And I think that's important. We are making our elections better. In addition to the no internet here in Idaho, a year ago, we changed our laws. We've had photo ID requirements to vote. So when you show up to the polls, you show them your driver's license. We've had that for about 12 years now, but now we added it for voter registration. We had an ID requirement, but it wasn't quite to the same standard we did for voting, so we added that, and that's part of what our office has done is working with Department of Transportation and others to say, yeah, you should show who you are when you register to vote. We should validate that. Anybody who needs help, we've now created a free ID for anybody who needs one. So if you don't have a driver's license, the state of Idaho will give you one happily. You can use it not just to register to vote, but you can also use it to buy beer if you need to.
Right.
Like,
and
it does the same thing.
That's not a driver's license. Idaho will give you a free identification.
Free identification card.
Okay.
Doesn't give you the privilege to drive. Yeah.
Like there are a lot of people who fail that driver's test that would really,
yeah.
and I did not fail, by the way, I passed the first time. But question for you, have you guys done away with the affidavit system?
No, we still have the affidavit system, but we've added safeguards, and that's part of it. Is the affidavits only apply? You cannot use an affidavit to register to vote. You must show, with the new changes we put in a year ago, you must show identification to register to vote. So you can't even get into the system until you've proven you are who you say you are. And then when voting, if you forget your ID, there are the affidavits. We see a very small number of people use the affidavits, but it's one of the things, and part of our process, due diligence at the end of the election, is to verify that information. I think the big surprise, I think you saw me share this, is we now collect data on everything. We're big. I'm a nerd. I'm an elections nerd. Like at heart, I love this stuff. I love like voting stats and everything else. You've seen me geek out. But also we collect data on all sorts of things. And so driver ID cards, like what ID do people show when they vote? I'm not surprised. You're not surprised that driver's license was the most common form of ID.
Sure.
Duh. I was shocked though, just how common it was. In the past 2 general elections that we've held, over 98% of voters showed a driver's license. The next highest is a passport at 0.5%. Like when someone asks, can I see your ID? Doesn't matter whether you're at the grocery store, doesn't matter where you are, you pull out your driver's license. And so this is part of it, is like us trying to find what small steps can we put in to safeguard elections, but also keep them accessible. I think too often one of the narratives I see is that security has to compete with access, or access has to reduce security. And there are ways, and I think as a country, we're finding better and better ways to improve access to voting while also increasing and enhancing the security of our elections.
So first off, thank you for all of that. One thing I really want to be clear on, though, you're saying 98% of people that registered to vote used a driver's license.
No, that voted when you went into the polls. So
they used a driver's license. Okay. And the driver's license system is a reasonably secure system as well, right?
Right.
Like beyond reasonably.
And it's gotten even better. I mean, now with the Star Card and like the documentation that you have to provide to get that information, it's continually getting enhanced.
So the idea that there was somebody running his mouth a couple of years ago that like 8 to 10% of Idaho ballots or votes were,
sure,
whatever. I can't remember. He was on like Fox News or something.
Sure.
Like we know that like 8% of these are all blah, blah. It's like, well, how are you going to get past the barriers of identification at registration and then identification when you go in to vote? And again, like if there are 100 people in a county, there are only 100 ballots printed, right?
Yeah.
And then we count them, and that everything has to match at the end. So the idea that there are 100 people in a county and there are 100 votes cast, and then somebody comes and stuffs 300 votes into the ballot, but it's like, that doesn't add up. If there are more ballots at the end, and it's all secure, and these all have identification numbers, and it's all printed out in a secure manner.
No, I appreciate the way you approach it. I mean, it's just the way you think about problems. Is I've had voters over the time come up to me, and I remember this was probably about 6 years ago, someone coming up to me and they're like, I heard this story that they're busing Democrats into the north end of Boise to vote. And I'm like, what are you talking about? At first, I was pretty flippant just in my response. And then all of a sudden, I had this moment like, oh, crap. No, this person's serious. And so first of all, if you've been down to the north end, you don't need to bus Democrats. They already live there. Like, there's no need for busing. Like,
You're busing to the wrong location.
Yeah, this isn't how it works.
Election.
But also, more importantly, I asked the question. I was like, all right, walk me through this.
Right.
You show up. What about, okay, you have to show your ID. Like, let's go through all these steps. In addition, behind the scenes, and this is going back to like signature verification, like we're constantly cleaning the voter rolls. We're removing people because they've died. We're moving people around the state. We check against Department of Corrections. We check against ITD. We're constantly doing updates. We provide a report to the legislature every year of the voter cleanup that we've done to the rolls, just let them know, here's what we're up to. And some legislators contact us, say, well, can you tell me, what does this look like in my district? And it could be all, a variety of reasons that we're maintaining the rolls. And I think those steps are really important to the process. And then you add on the layers of not just on the front end, stopping things. I will say, like, I'm a big advocate. We have now electronic poll books. So if you go to your local polling place to vote, they'll scan your driver's license. Not only they'll look at you and then they'll scan it. It'll pull up your voter record just like that. But these pieces of equipment also communicate in a way that helps us prevent. Let's say you dropped an absentee ballot in a mailbox right as you were walking in. You're like, oh, they won't be able to catch it. Like, no, we can easily catch and stop and make sure that only one vote ever gets counted. And now Ada County, to their credit, you had touched on this, they just launched their ballot verifier. So Trent Triple, he's the Ada County clerk. He used to be my right-hand man. Trent's doing an amazing job in his role at the county. And what Trent's added, and it was really his vision, saying like, I'm tired. He was getting tired, just the fatigue of people saying, well, what about this? What about that? And he's like, let me just show you. Let me show you all the cards I've got. And so they created a tool. It's one of the first of its kind in the nation where they post every single image of every single ballot here in the county. Not only do they post the image of the ballot so that if you want to go hand count and do your own tally, have at it and all your friends, they also post side by side with the record of what the machine read the ballot to say. So this record says, oh, on this ballot, we saw a vote for Donald Trump. We saw a vote for Mike Simpson, whatever, go down the line and say like, oh yeah, I can do a side-by-side comparison. Like, and if you want to, you can drill down to your precinct. You want to figure out how your neighbors vote? You can drill right in and start looking through the images and seeing exactly how it is. So we're trying to add as much transparency as humanly possible. In my career, we added cameras to the process so that people can hop on right now. You want to see the people working in the elections warehouse, they're live streaming as we speak, so you can see the process.
That's awesome. Is that at Vote Idaho?
So that's all at Ada County elections. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But we have, you can go on Vote Idaho, you can access each of your counties. So depending on where you live in the state, you can go find a link to your county to see the information they have available at your county. But we're making strides, and we've got room to grow. Like, we're going to continue to build on this. I think in a state like ours, one of the challenges is you have the 80 counties of the world on one hand, who are 300,000+ registered voters, and then you have gradually gets down to where we have these small counties that are wearing lots of hats. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see, and this goes into voter information, is in some parts of the state, we just elect too many people. People are
wait. What do you?
Yeah. No, people are always surprised if someone asks me, election reforms, like what was the thing that you would change if you could? And honestly, despite I'm a huge election nerd, I love elections. We just elect too many people sometimes. You may not realize it, but here where you live, the cemetery district commissioner is elected.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So there are too many different commissions.
There's too many different. And so if you are in Clark County, Idaho, so it's the smallest county in the state, there's just under 350 registered voters. But Clark County has 3 commissioners, just like you've met. They have a sheriff, but they also have 9 county officials. They also have, Du Bois has city council and a mayor. They also have fire districts. They also have, hospital districts, all these other layers that we have in terms of government. They also have schools, and they have school board members. And all of a sudden, it starts to look like,
so it's like
pretty much everyone in town is elected. Or my favorite up in Donley, I think everyone who listens knows where Donley is. When I was out campaigning, I got to meet people in the community, and there are 3 people who take turns being the mayor of Donley. And it's more like a relay race. It's just you go until you're wiped out, and then you're like, all right, Matt, you're up. I'm out.
Really?
Yes. Because it's just a small community. It's working. Like, things are going okay.
Right.
And, so these jobs aren't like, I think that's one of the things, and I will say the attention that's been given to Secretary of States, I think one of the biggest challenges is, while it is a very, very, very small minority of people, public service has become much more hostile. Getting people to step up and to serve has become more challenging. I was having a conversation. I flew with Russ Fulcher not too long ago, and he pointed out, he said one of the hardest things he's seen over his tenure is the bench just isn't as deep. He's like, I used to talk to people all the time and be like, oh yeah, I've always thought about, running for the legislature or serving in some way. But now the pressures that come with these roles has just, whether it's sitting on your school board, whether it's sitting in the legislature, or your library district, it's become more demanding. And Just as you were asking, it made me think of a great story I love to share. Is last summer, I had a really cool, unique opportunity. I got to go to an event, and the keynote speaker was General Mad Dog Mattis. And you want to meet an amazing American. If for anybody listening, if you haven't ever like Google Mad Dog quotes, because he's one of the most quotable Americans ever.
Oh, he's the best.
Dude, he is.
Oh my gosh, man. Yeah.
He is just like his top 10 quotes. You're like, oh, dude, this guy's badass.
What's the one about what gives you nightmares is like nothing. I give nightmares to people.
Yes. That was like his 60-minute. He didn't even like miss a beat.
He didn't. He was so hard in that interview. Oh, it was great.
Yes. Yeah. And so afterwards, I got to chat with him a little bit. And in the course of our conversation, I mean, it lived up to everything about him. He was inspiring when he spoke, but getting to chat with him, it came up what I did. All right. And he's like, man, you took on a tough line of work these days. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, thank you for your service. And I was taken aback. And I really said, oh, no. I said, this doesn't even compare to your service to our country. Thank you for your service. And he looked at me and said, yeah, but in our line of work, we get to shoot back. And I can tell you, there's no one who hasn't been in one of these seats at one point in time or another taking grief who isn't being like, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, this is demanding work these days. I see it at the legislature. This was a tense legislative session for all those involved, from the Speaker of the House to the pro tem, all the way down. One of the biggest things is we need participation at the polls, but we also need to find people who are willing to step up to these roles and to serve our community.
I wasn't going to ask you about this, but this is something that I very much agree with. And for instance, this is about as much as public facing as I could be. And I am like neutral. So if people come after me, it's like, I never said anything good or bad about any of this.
Sure.
Like, but you actually have
feel
to
it.
make, oh, it's crazy. And over the Eagle election, like, it got so intense. And it's like, I don't even live in Eagle. Like, I'm literally just trying to interview people and get information out there. And the desire that people had to defame me or slander me. And I was just a dude with a microphone and a couple cameras. Like, I'm not even trying to tell you what to do. I don't espouse to have any information that's unique. I don't have any solutions. I'm not advocating for anything.
But yet you feel it.
Oh, it's bonkers.
Right?
It's bonkers. How is it that you've been able to tolerate that with a positive attitude? Because to me, it's like somebody explained to me about a year ago. They're like, look, here's the thing. There are a lot of different political factions that believe that they just need to wear out. They need to wear down those sitting in the chair, so that people that come to these positions that might be, volunteer positions or at least you're not getting paid. You're on a commission. Like, you had to go through a campaign. You're not even getting reimbursed for it. Like, all these things, they're just going to wear you down until you can't take it anymore. You're like, it's not worth it. Like, this is not worth it. I'm not getting paid for this. This is not where I make my living. And I'm taking grief all day long. How is that?
And that's hard, because we need good people. Like, the best people, many of them have lives and families and other things and care, right? And I think to the heart of your question, I think it is a tough balance. One of the things I've observed now stepping into this arena, where I will say it's amplified much more at the level that I'm at. I think the higher you move, the more opportunity you have to create waves. One of the biggest challenges I see is managing through all of this, so social media, all the other things, the noise that you mentioned. And the other part is not developing too thick of a skin. There are public figures I see who navigate it just fine, but the thicker your skin gets, the more you lose touch with the people you represent. Because just like you stopping the bad from coming in, you can also stop the good from coming in. And so, we have a phrase in our office, happy honest. One of my staff coined it early on as just how I operate wandering around the building, is just like our happy honest approach. Like, we're going to be accessible. We're here to represent the people, and we want to have fun while doing it. And so I like to think in the Capitol building, we're kind of known as the fun office. And so it's like, part of it is you find the really rewarding opportunities. It goes both ways. I can face some significant criticism. I can think of a moment during the legislative session. It was actually somebody who helped and supported me, but like cornered me and was just frustrated. And they weren't really frustrated with me. They were just frustrated with a bill that was up. But like, I got cornered, and it was like, whoa, this is not, this isn't productive, first and foremost. And those moments happen and can be tough. But I had like a little over a week ago, I had one of the coolest experiences. I was setting up my sprinklers, just like everybody else. Sunday morning, I'm turning my sprinklers on, trying to get them all set for the spring. Woman's walking by with her dog. I quickly try to stop the sprinklers so I don't spray this poor lady and her dog walking by. And as she started to walk by a little bit further, she stops and she's like, wait, I feel like I recognize you. It's probably just because you're a neighbor or whatever. And I was like, well, I know enough interacting with you. I was like, you've seen me on KTVB or wherever else. And I said, no, I'm Phil McGrane. I'm your Secretary of State. I hadn't even finished saying Secretary of State. And she was just like, took a step back and she just said, thank you. Thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being a reasonable voice, willing to, help make sure we can have our elections. And what really shocked me, I've had that happen on a handful of occasions, is she was tearful about it. Like she really cared about the work that our office does. Someone I've never met. And I think she was just surprised that I'm a normal guy, just like everybody else. I just live here. I'm messing with my doing it myself, right? Like I've got kids. I think one of the cool things in my experience is I'm the only statewide officer right now with young children. Everyone else has kids, but they're just grown. And so it shows up in various ways. I'm pretty sure my son is the first person to wear Heelys in the governor's office. I haven't validated that, but I'm pretty confident.
Wait, what's a Heely?
You don't know what a Heely is?
No.
They're shoes with wheels on the back heel.
Okay, I know
that you can like
are.
skate.
Yeah.
Right? So I have an 8-year-old, right?
Yes.
And so there's nothing like trying to navigate the marble of the Capitol building with an 8-year-old on wheels, right? Like
that's awesome.
My kids feel at home in the building, which is kind of a cool thing. And they sacrifice a ton. You talk about like with what you were feeling in the race, like my kids also they live in this space. I don't get to turn it off at any point in time. Right. And I think this is an important issue, not for everybody. Is like, we want the best and brightest to serve in these roles. Like, especially when we talk about whether it's the presidency, whether it's our governor, when we get into our legislative races, like we want good people. And we do have some really amazing people. You've had really great Americans here on your show who are fighting for what they believe in. They're fighting for their community. We need people to step up, but we also have to create a healthy environment so people can do it. And not just the people doing those roles, but also people like you, people who are like helping in the process.
Let me ask you something. How do we do that though? Because what you're talking about is, hey, look, we need these people. And I always tell people that are running campaigns, I'm like, look, win, lose, or draw, thank you for doing what you're doing. Because if campaigns are not interesting, they're not great. There are 4 people running for one spot in Ada County Commissioner right now.
Great, which means 3 are going to lose.
Yeah, 3 are going to lose. And 3 are running as hard as they can, going through all the flack, getting all the criticism, spending all of their time. And I always think that it's like, if we didn't have people like you doing this, it would just be one person or nobody, right? Which would be a horrible thing as well. That's not going to yield the best results. The best results always come, even if each person brings one issue that needs to be brought to light, then we all benefit from it. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So whoever does win the election inherits an educated populace with, oh, hey, what about this issue that person brought up? You're going to address that, right? And they're like, well, it wasn't really my issue, but this person really made it popular. So like, now I have to address that issue. Right.
Well, and it's like we believe in capitalism because competition is good.
Right.
And in this space, when it's why we have a democracy and why we show up to vote a couple times a year is because we think like, hey, let's have a debate. Let's share these ideas. Like as you said, when you've done your interviews with some of the candidates for commission, they each have kind of their niche thing that they care about. And you're like, but collectively, they're forcing each other to talk about other issues.
Right.
And to say like, well, yeah, I understand that, but what about this issue?
Okay. But here's a question. In my lifetime, and I'm not very old, I'm 42, but in my lifetime, I've definitely noticed, like, I like talking to people, and there are definitely people that come in that I don't agree with them, but I still get to sit down and be like, tell me about that. Like, I don't understand that. And we walk away, I'm like, well, I don't really agree with that guy, or I don't agree with that gal. And I guess the community is going to decide, which is true. The community will decide eventually. But how do we get to the point where people don't kill their neighbors during the campaigns and then have to like repair these horrendously fractured relationships, or fail to repair them after the election? Where it's like, look, win, lose, or draw, we're still going to be neighbors, right? Like we get to that point where we still make burgers, like you like this guy, I like this gal, like whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot that you touched on there in terms of, one, I think people are addressing that in their own way these days. You've seen some of the mapping that we've got on Vote Idaho that shows where people are moving is people are self-selecting. They're moving around people that are similar to them. We're seeing that all around the country more and more, so that, there is more commonality in terms of those views. I think one of the bigger challenges is people being at peace, whatever the outcome of the election, right? So being able to say, like, you've fought a hard fight, let's regroup and go to the next battle, the next election.
Right.
I see too much angst. You talked about it earlier in terms of like people pumping in fear, right? So you have like outside groups sending messages trying to stoke a fire that you're like, when you actually sit here, like in Dry Creek, you're like, there's no fire.
Right.
What? I look around, I've talked to all my neighbors, none of them seem crazy. Like everything seems actually pretty good.
Crazy.
Oh, well, fair enough. But you know what I mean?
Like the Eagle election is a perfect example of this.
The Eagle election is a great example.
You have Mayor Pike and you had former Mayor Pierce, and you had two people that were predominantly conservative, and they disagreed literally on like 2 points, right? That Mayor Pike didn't like Avamore, and Mayor Pierce didn't even get a vote for Avamore. Like, it didn't even go to him for vote, and he was very pro Avamore, fine, but he didn't even vote on it. Then there was, a development downtown that, a councilman at the time, Councilman Pike, wanted to give an exemption for. So it was like these minor little things. You did have a disagreement about law enforcement, but the law enforcement disagreement came down to like two reasonable people. Pierce was saying that, hey, look, we need to look at the number of crimes committed and base our numbers for law enforcement officers based on that. And now Mayor Pike was saying, no, we need to look at the geographic range, or give more weight to the geographic range and the number of crimes committed, but we have to patrol this larger area because we have Avamore. Two totally reasonable positions. It's like, okay, this guy's just looking at like gross numbers and factors just in geography, but this guy thinks geography is more important. Like, okay, that's great. But you had people thinking that if if one person won the election versus another person, it was like the end of Eagle. And it was like,
I think it's perfect. You were closer to that election than I was. I mean, I was watching it from the administrative side because it had a runoff, and there's a lot of technical stuff on our space for that. But I also think, though, it's kind of like a microcosm for what we were talking about, those national groups. I think when that race really, like, I don't want to say exploded, but really got intense, was when it was no longer just a race about Eagle and Eagle. Right. It was when state PACs and state groups that don't live in Eagle, aren't part of Eagle, got engaged. Right. There were groups on both sides who started to get engaged and put in money and the energy, and you watched the politics explode in that space. Like, it just got amplified. So now it wasn't just a debate in and among the city of Eagle. Right. It was like this was existential.
Right. That's what I keep thinking about saying. It was this existential fight for like our survival, fueled by people who were not going to feel the fallout from the election. Right. Like, it's not going to affect you at all. You're just trying to get me to do what you want me to do. And again, to be clear, I'm not even an Eagle voter. I was just watching this like, wow, this is amazing. Like watching like an ant colony go crazy. It was like, what is happening in there? And people got so intense about it. It was like, guys, just make the best call that you think based on whatever, and then let it go. Like, Eagle's going to be okay. We always have mayoral turnover. Sure. You never get the same guy twice or whoever. It's going to be okay. And by the way, the mayor doesn't even have a vote unless there's a tie on the city council. So like, you should pay more attention to the city council.
Like how it actually works. Yes. Because no one's watching the city council race because someone's so focused on it. Well, and I think, why I bring up too these outside groups coming in, when I say outside, just state groups, that is all of a sudden the narrative changes too, going back to the existential piece. Because I hear this narrative all the time. It's no longer about, I mean, you interviewed them, like when you compare Pierce versus Pike, I know both of them, right? Sure. Very respectable
absolutely
people. Like, that's where the debate should be, in trying to tease out the differences. Instead, we bring in, like, look what Mayor McLean's doing. Look what's happening in the city of Boise. Like, Eagle's about to fall apart, and you're like, what? Those are two different cities, two totally different environments, different things happening. Right. But that, all of a sudden, that noise creates confusion and frustration. And like, because there's a reason people have chosen to live in Eagle and didn't choose to live in downtown Boise. Right. And that's why the people here who live in Eagle should decide their election.
Right. Not the LA Times writing articles about it.
Not the LA Times. Precisely.
God, that was so brutal. One more thing that I really want to touch on, and again, I appreciate your time here. The nature of election manipulation with people, either like sending out robocalls that mimic people's voices, or sending out bad mailers, or, misleading mailers, things of that nature. when people are running, they can get a hold of your office and say like, hey, this thing has happened, right? What do you like? What's the nature of you going after figuring out, okay, who is this? Who's doing this? What are the repercussions? And what are the repercussions if some out-of-state group just floods an area with like limitless flyers and all kinds of bad media that's misleading, flat out untrue? I mean, is there any recourse that the state Secretary of State has?
The challenge is, I'm going to say no to the core of your question. So yes, we monitor all of it. So if you get a dozen mailers in your mailbox, which I'm sure some people will get a dozen mailers coming up in their mailbox, all of them should say paid for by. They should say paid for, whoever the candidate was, whatever the political group is, the save the whatever again, all that information. And you should be able to go to our site. So go to voteidaho.gov, look at our candidate or our campaign finance portal, and be able to type in whatever that says. You should be able to search like save the whatever. And see where that money's coming from. Like see how much money they put into it, especially with some of these national groups. They're putting a lot of money into it. See who their donors are. So we try to show like, who's this being paid for? Is this being paid for from local residents, right? Or even local businesses? Or is this money coming from out of state or Washington, D.C. or somewhere else? KTVB did a great story recently on one of the big national PACs where there's like the South Carolina Fondue King is one of the major donors to this national group.
There's a Fondue King?
This Fondue King from South Carolina who is a big donor to this group that is attacking a bunch of local legislators pretty broad. I mean, attacking Speaker Moyle, attacking Pro Tem Winder, attacking a bunch of other people. And they even got a hold of the guy and he's like, I don't know who these guys are. I don't, he's just a big donor. He's
just a fondue guy.
He just supports what this national group is.
If he's into fondue, he should be careful when he attacks places with dairies.
Right.
Like, he needs that fondue.
You think. And so it's interesting. So what we do is we track all the money. Anybody who's participating in the political space has to report the amount of money they're bringing in, where it's coming from, and how they're spending their money. What we don't regulate is the messages. And I think that's really hard, right? Because some of these attacks have become very vicious. But based on the First Amendment, the highest threshold for free speech is political speech. We fought really, really hard to speak ill of King George. A lot of people died. And so this is one of these free speech issues. And it's really hard because people have the tactics that are being used, the messaging has lost its way in terms of civility. I've personally experienced that. I'm certain if we all look, some of it we can all just roll our eyes and say like, oh yeah, that person has never been with Nancy Pelosi. Right. Like, right. But it's tough because it is getting more complicated. Both campaigns are getting better at it. But as you know, in this space, not only editing that you can do here, I think one of the hottest topics these days, both on a national and local level, is the introduction of AI. And now we can create images that never existed. Like I go into DALL-E and I type like, give me a downtown Eagle picture with homeless encampments all lining up and down the street.
And
all of a sudden, and now this, I do think as a society, and it's less to do with elections. I think we're going to have to struggle with like, there's the whole, you want to see it. I want to see firsthand if this is real. And like now, like with the image editing, audio editing, video editing is getting more complicated. I don't think it's quite there yet, but we all could see it's on the horizon where we are going to have an existential challenge as just a species trying to figure out like what is real and what's not.
I actually think we need to get to this point really, really fast. Because the difficulty that I think we will experience is going from the stage where we believe everything we see and we read, and then getting through the phase of like the mass integration of fraud, and then to the back end to we have very, very specific sources that we will trust for very, very specific reasons. The problem is when you're caught in between those two spaces where you don't have a very curated, selective, thought out protocol for establishing validity of something, and you're just consuming things in the manner that you used to, which is like I used to believe everything I read or heard, like phone calls going out, things like that. So I actually think the more we can integrate just blatant fraud and then train everyone to stop paying attention to it, the faster we'll get to the back end where it's like, where did you see? They're like, the first thing you need is like, who provided this? Where did you see it? Like, what's the man? Blah, 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 blah. And then we'll actually be able to eliminate a lot of that persuasion in our society. But it's when people still believe that they can blindly listen to this messaging, that's when we're in trouble.
Right. I think is that. And then just from where I sit, I think too often our solution is to turn to government. Well, government is intentionally slow. Technology is impressively fast.
Right.
And it may not be government. I think it's really people coming together. I mean, I'm a limited government Republican, and this is part of the reason why is like technological advances and what just people can do on their own, just entrepreneurs in the society is amazing. And like, we don't want to get in the way, but at the same time, we want to make sure we have safe communities.
Right. Right. Listen, I've had you for a while. I so appreciate you. I've really enjoyed this. I hope we can do it again at a later date and keep talking because again, we hit on a few things. I have a ton more questions, but I don't want to take your.
Well, we got a big election coming up in November, so
yeah, man, we'll get after it. Do you have anything you want to say in closing? Because again,
no, please, I am guessing that most of the people who follow you are engaged in the elections process. Hopefully people get out to vote, especially here on May 21st, but also we've got a really big election coming up in November, and encourage other people, we've got a great system in the state of Idaho, and I want people to participate in it. Yeah, that is such a good point. The nature of the state so far has been so impressive because it is small enough. It is functioning. Like I can call my representatives. I can talk to you. I can do a lot of things that I would never be able to do elsewhere. And because it's my understanding, at least looking at it, it's like, because you're small enough, because we're not so bloated and so, strangled by bureaucracy, we actually can get things done. We actually can make progress, which is such a beautiful thing. So again, the people listening to this, please do out and vote. It's part of the process. Anyway, thank you for coming in, sir. Thank you.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.